consider everything that was raised during their process of public participation before they adopted this bill. The provincial negotiating mandate will then contain critical issues that affect the said provinces. Remember, the Select Committee on Appropriation is one of the committees that have each and every delegate representing a province. Therefore, we are a committee that has 9 delegates from each province in the country. So all 9 provinces are represented in the Select Committee on Appropriations. Therefore, the negotiating mandates will contain that critical information submitted by each province, and it will require a response from the National Treasury before the committee will adopt its report, and then the National Treasury will be expected to respond to the issues raised by provinces. Then this is where the committee the Committee on Appropriations from the NCOP side will call a meeting with the National Treasury and will invite chairpersons of portfolio committees on finances from various provinces for the National Treasury to come and respond to issues that may have been raised according to the negotiating mandates that permanent delegates would have submitted to the committee. Then on week number 5, the National Treasury will be expected to respond to these issues and prepare the provincial legislatures for their final mandates, which will be the voting mandates, which will have to be submitted to the committee for processing. Then the Select Committee on Appropriation will have to consolidate and adopt the final provincial negotiating or the voting mandates, as I already mentioned, and finalize the report of the bill. After finalizing and consolidating, the committee will then adopt its report and send it to the NCOP. The NCOP will then call a plenary to consider and adopt the committee's report and the provincial negotiating mandates. When that is done, the bill will then send to the president for the president to assent. But it is also important that when in between the process, there's lobbying that takes place, because for the bill to go through, it requires at least a voting in favor from at least 5 provinces from the submitted negotiating or voting mandates, the final negotiating or voting mandates. And it is also important that I raise it here that a negotiating mandate or a voting mandate is not only dependent on an individual delegate that sits in the Appropriations Committee. A formal letter must be written by the Speaker of each and every legislature, giving permission to the delegate to come and represent the province which they come from to vote whether in favor or against the bill. I think for now this is where I will end, because mine was just to come and outline the role or the process which we will be embarking on as a committee on Parliament after the budget has been tabled. More engagements will come after the presentations are made and during the question and answer sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Khosa. I think that's a very important outline of the process, especially within the context of the misconception following the postponement of the budget that the following day, it means that government will not be able to spend, the whole service delivery will collapse, etc. I think it's important to assert that what the minister presents during the budget is a proposal to Parliament, which must be subjected to the various finance committees that must facilitate public consultation, and whatever work that needs to be done, if there are amendments to the budget, they will be done through that process before the report of the committees recommending the adoption of those bills goes to the 2 houses of Parliament, the National Assembly, National Council of Provinces, for consideration and for adoption. So Parliament, from the adoption of, from the budget speech, from the moment the speech is presented by the minister, will have up to about 3 months within which it must process the budget. So while the postponement we said was undesirable, but it is important that we understand the process, that it did not affect the period within which the institution has to do its work on the budget. So that's very important. Amongst the guests, I don't know, he's not a guest that we are having, is Dr. Dumisani Janjis, who is our director of the Parliamentary Budget Office that supports these committees that are before you. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to invite the Honorable Chairperson of the Standing Committee on Appropriations, Honorable Mmusi Maimane.
You have changed the order. Sanbonan Dumelang, Khuyemore, Molweni. Let me first of all acknowledge also the presence of Dr. Bamba, the chairperson of the FFC and also the PBO. And I think the director at the PBO and also my fellow colleagues, members of the media. I think we find ourselves in a very unique and a very important position as a country. In many ways, it coincides quite neatly with 30 years of democracy, because it means for the first time, given that there is no outright majority in South Africa, we find ourselves at a place where not only do we have to test our political muscle in how we put together a government, but we have to test our collective legislative muscle in terms of how the structures of government are supposed to work. And I think the events that took place at the first attempt to table the budget that will be tabled on Wednesday will mean for the people of South Africa that for the first time, we have to find a way of making sure that as the budget is processed, it follows its intended legislative process, which is that it is Parliament that will eventually pass, if you like, make the lawmaking process of making the budget the law, which I think is an important step as we sit here today. But it also means that we need to find a new coalition, not only between political parties, but I do think as we make difficult choices going ahead, a new coalition between rich and poor, and certainly between all sectors of society, if we're going to achieve a budget that is workable for all the people of South Africa. And I think for me, as the chair of the Standing Committee on Appropriations, to which the bills will eventually serve for interrogation, there are a number of key issues that we begin to look at. The first is naturally, what is the projections that South Africa looks towards? It is now common cause that South Africa is growing at less than 1% on average in the last 10 years. Our projected growth, even for this financial year, is at 0.6%. What the minister will table in all probability on Wednesday is a projected growth of about 1.8% over the medium term, and taking lead from the president that effectively we need to be growing at 3% over the medium term in order for us to be able to deal with some of the challenges that South Africa faces. So our first problem is not, as many would say, VAT. Our first problem is growth. And you could do everything you like around the budget. The reality is that there is no reality upon which you can sustain low levels of growth in a geopolitical climate and a global suppressed growth, and keep hoping that you'll do a number of adjustments within the budget. Hopefully you'll keep yourself sustainable. It's got to be important that we do everything we can to focus on growth. It is important, and I'm almost certain, as we speak about the medium-term plan, which was adopted by Cabinet, which will serve in the Houses of Parliament, which gives us the guide towards how we analyze the budget, that there are a couple of things that are of structural reforms that the minister has to work towards. And those speak to the idea of how to keep the lights on, and that's Eskom. How do we provide water for all citizens? How do we ensure that our social spend delivers its intentions? And ultimately, how do we deal with our rail logistics? These are critical priorities that we need to have a conversation about if we're going to have a budget that works. And please do take note that when I look at these issues, I depart from the point of view that there's a broader macroeconomic plan, a medium-term policy and framework that ultimately gives us annual performance plans that are then budgeted and funded for. And that is part of what we need to assess. So with those opening thoughts, I want to then speak about the things that perhaps maybe present a risk and take 4 crucial areas that might help us think about the budget in a much more cogent manner. The first is, where does South Africa accrue its own income? And much has been had a discussion about the increase of VAT, but governments equally so look at personal tax or look at the exercise of borrowing. It is no secret the fact that for every 1 rand that comes into South Africa, 22 cents of it goes into debt servicing costs. We will effectively be spending more on debt than we do on social spend, on key items in the budget, and I'll talk you through those as we look at. So it is clear that what the debt servicing costs are doing is in fact crowding out some of the expenditure that was designed to go into some of the infrastructure growth, etc. Debt servicing costs were increasing by 6.9%. They will peak at 22 cents of revenue between 2025 and 2028. Effectively, now, as I said to you, debt servicing costs are now higher than government spending on social development, economic development, peace and security, and health. It is high and untenable. And when people make the argument to say, well, government needs to borrow more, when your bonds are being rated as junk, it becomes a massive crisis to increase borrowing costs, because ultimately they will stop you from expenditure on other issues. Over the last decade, government has spent over 520 billion rands on bailouts to state-owned enterprises, which presents to me the second part of where the risks in the budget lie, is that the Eskom debt becomes a key concern for all South Africans. So effectively, a cross-defaulting Eskom would have profound consequences for our economy. But I do think it's also crucial to note the fact that Eskom, and one of the discussions we will have going into the budget cycle, is how we manage Eskom's debt, what is the state's obligation towards that, but furthermore, what are municipalities' contribution in their ability to pay their Eskom debts look at. It is projected to peak at 130 billion rands in the medium term, which puts Eskom in a very perilous position where it cannot fund easily for growth and has to fulfill the obligation of keeping the lights on. It is furthermore on, as Honorable Zibi has already highlighted, the collapse of water boards and what we do around funding for Transnet. The third risk is the most crucial, which is the conversation we're having about the SRD grant and whether or not any expenditure frame will be able to sustain the SRD expenditure that we're looking at, which is sitting at about 37 billion rands as things stand at the moment. So between bailouts, SRD, it becomes common cause that if you are going to look at the budget and being able to balance the figures, you need to look at how to reduce expenditure and increase efficiencies in the budget. The other fundamental issue that I look at is obviously the idea of where you think about expenditure. There are 2 serious expenditure items that the state has to confront. The first is the cost of employees, which on average sits at about 38 cents to whatever 1 rand comes in. And cost of employees is what I mean. And therefore, in the next medium term, we have to confront the elephant that sits in the room. What do we agree to as far as increases in the medium term for civil servants in that regard? The negotiated space sits at, the budgeted framework sits at 5.5%. It's up in whether the state will be able to afford that in the medium term. The second is obviously and naturally, as I've spoken about in the expenditure cycle, on issues of SRD and social welfare spend. So, I certainly do think that over and above all of these discussions, whether or not you think about it from an income point of view, where you raise more income, you think about it from an expenditure point of view, we need to target expenditure in more productive assets. And in this regard, I do think we need to think hard about how do we increase our infrastructure spend. When you look at 2024, the government planned total infrastructure investment over the next 3 years is approximately 943 billion rands, which includes 486 billion rands by state-owned enterprises and public entities, 213 billion rands from municipalities, and 224 billion from provincial and national governments. So between 2012 and 2022, public sector capital investment averaged at 5.4% of GDP. It is way below the projected, or at least the anticipated target, or the envisioned target of 30% that was tabled in the National Development Plan. So immediately, that gulf means that aging infrastructure is becoming a crisis. So if you live in a township, load reduction becomes part of your reality day in, day out. And if you are thinking about the South African economy, the future or the pathway towards growth requires us to enhance more of the infrastructure spend as we go ahead. Fellow South Africans, I do think we need to say to ourselves, how do we enhance efficiency? And this speaks particularly to municipalities. And we've all read with harrowing effects the municipalities that are returning money back or wasteful and fruitless expenditure. But I think this is a moment where we need to rethink what we do with municipalities. The white paper on local government already indicates the 90-10 split, which is no longer sustainable. Municipalities have come to our committee and said they're only capable of raising 60% of their revenue relative to the required 90%, which means that shortfall has to be funded in some way or another. Either you say in the revised white paper on local government, whether you increase the 10% municipal infrastructure grant that you give to municipalities, cognizant of the fact that much often of that is underspent by municipalities who don't have capacity to do so, or you figure out a different mechanism for municipalities to be able to accrue or at least raise some of that finance. We are at the peak of taxation, I would argue. And therefore, we have to think hard about A, cutting expenditure, focused on prioritized growth on infrastructure, and ensuring that our state is much more efficient. On the last point I want to make, which is perhaps maybe helpful for all citizens, is that as the minister tables the proposal on Thursday, it is but that, a proposal. Parliament has a duty to process the budget. And our colleagues from the NCOP, the chairs, have already alluded their particular process. And it is natural even within the National Assembly that a particular process must be undertaken. And it's in this regard I want to abuse platform, Ndate, to invite fellow South Africans on the 1st of April, 1st and 2nd of April, we're having public consultations on the budget itself. I know one might say, why do you have it on April Fools? That's why we thought about it hard. So it's not any indictment on the budget, it's merely because on the 2nd, and we've been very intentional as a committee to say we want to go to communities and hear from the people, what the people have to say about the budget. They will be held as a hybrid session in Limpopo, where the committee will hear from community members. The reason we've chosen Limpopo is because we'll be going around to multiple provinces, but I want to make sure that the budget isn't just only a macroeconomic framework. It's also what happens to the ordinary South African and where they sit at home. You and I can have an academic discussion about VAT, about all of these things, about debt and many. But at the end of the day, it's whether or not there's a granny who's able to go to a hospital and find that there's a doctor. There's a learner who's able to go to a school and discover there's a teacher. Or ultimately, it's whether a woman is able to walk around and report a case at the police station and know there'll be policing that deals with that issue. 60% of our spend is on social wage, and therefore I do think it is fair that we hear from the immediate beneficiaries of those issues, which are the people of South Africa, and therefore we'll be taking that on board. That will mean a report is tabled to Parliament, which is scheduled to be adopted and debated in May, and then ultimately Parliament itself will pass the Division of Revenue and the Appropriations Bill, which will then be signed by the President into law. But I assure you, as the people of South Africa, this is your moment where we test our democratic principles, our lawmaking process to say, you have to have your voice in what happens in the budget. Because I might think something is efficient, but someone sitting at home might look at it and say, it's inefficient for me to stand at a long line for SASSA grants or whatever the case might be. Or it's inefficient for me when I look at the provincial equitable share formula. That means that there are more people in one province, but budgets have been allocated in a skewed manner. It is important to hear from those South Africans, from business, from trade unions, so that ultimately the voice of the people is expressed when we look at the budget. So in that light, I'm hoping today I'll be able to hear, at least from this room, some of the inputs that we take forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Maimane, and thank you very much for abusing the platform to highlight that process that the committee is undertaking, because it is through that process that Parliament ensures that the budget is truly a people-centered or a people's budget. Thank you very much. Those are very important processes. Let me also welcome you, Honorable Maimane, to welcome Dr. Nombeko Mbava, the chairperson of the Financial and Fiscal Commission, which of course plays, as Honorable Lokwase was highlighting, plays a very important role or important constitutionally advisory role to the Parliament and the provincial legislatures on fiscal matters. Thank you very much for your presence. May I invite Honorable Sanin Ndlovu, the chairperson of Select Committee on Finance in the NCOP. Thank you.
Thank you, Ntate Mthabo. Good morning all, especially members of the media and stakeholders present, and my colleagues, Dr. Masanganyi, Ntate Maimane, and Mayor Ntate Zibi, and Melochas, my colleagues. Good morning, everyone. It is my singular honor to participate in this very important initiative created to update members of the public about the work that we do as a Select Committee on Finance and in the NCOP. Ladies and gentlemen, it is important to note that as a Select Committee on Finance, while our work complements that of our sister committee that is led by Mr. Masanganyi, the Standing Committee on Finance, we have a unique mandate of ensuring that provincial interests are taken into account at the national sphere of government. I think, as I indicated on my theme, is to ensuring that the programs of the national departments have service delivery impact at provincial and local governments level. We promote the principle of cooperative governance and intergovernmental relations when processing the national budget. For instance, our interest as the committee is on the allocation of budget to provinces and municipalities because these two spheres of government are at the coalface of service delivery. It is not an accident, therefore, that we are referred to as delegates to NCOP. I think it's like there's an echo. It's fine. Okay. It is not an accident, therefore, that we are referred to as delegates to the NCOP. That is enshrined in the Constitution, section 61(2)(a), where it reads that the provincial legislature must, within 30 days after the results of the elections of the legislature, to also announce the delegation to the NCOP who is going to represent the province to the National Council of Provinces. It is for this reason, therefore, that whatever we do as a committee should reflect the aspiration of the provincial legislature. So it is very much important for the members of the public and the media to understand that whatever we are discussing as a select committee on finance, it is also the interest of the province, not of the other things. Lastly, as I indicate, as part of our oversight role over the executive there, we invite the National Treasury and the South African Revenue Service on any other institutions within the finance sector to come and brief the committee on any matter deemed to be important. So I must also try to abuse Ndate Muthapo, the platform given, also indicating that we have already issued the notice whereby we expect the submissions from the public and the stakeholders, that we expect them to submit their proposals, and we'll going to have a public hearing on the 25 March 2025. So I'm not going to make the the same announcement, especially in terms of how the processes are going to be followed. We must also indicate that on that process, we will also we will work jointly with the Standing Committee on Finance in processing the fiscal framework and the revenue proposals, as I indicated on earlier, Ndate Muthapo, on the issue of the advert, and as when we table to a joint sitting of the National Assembly and the NCOP by the minister, will also be requesting that there should be an indication of from the public what is it that they expect from the committee, or what are the issues that they want to address, or the committee to address. So I don't think we'll have to be much, going to say much, especially from our committee, because most of the things, our colleagues from the appropriation in terms of the processes, they've said it mouthful, and we expect other things maybe to address it on the question and answer session. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair Ndlovu. Thank you very much. The last presentation, we'll get it from the Honorable Chairperson of the Standing Committee on Finance, Dr. Maswanganya.
Thank you, Program Director, and thanks to the colleagues, chairpersons of finance committees who are present here, the FFC, Dr. Mbava and your colleagues, PBO Director, Professor Chankis, and other officials from the PBO, the support teams from Parliament, media. I will complement what the colleagues have said already, that budget is an instrument for translating policies and plans into public goods and service delivery. And we have got evidence as to what budget has done over the past 30 years. And the processes that it has gone through. I think in 1994, the South African budget was 200 and something billion, if I'm not mistaken. But now it has gone beyond 1 trillion. So that has to be acknowledged. And the impact that budget had made over the past 30 years, which I can't go through here. If you go into the Census 22 report, it outlines the impact of the budget over the past 30 years on water, electricity, the village where I come from, around Guyane, there was no electricity in 1994. We got electricity in 1996. And a whole range of other services that were not there. I could not go to the university. I was admitted at the University of the North in 1987. I could not get there because my parents could not even afford registration fee, despite the fact that I was admitted. I had the letter. But today, a child of a farmer can access UCT and Wits University, which was unheard of before because of NSFAS. And a whole range of other things that I can talk about, that the impact that this budget has had, more especially on the poor. Today, children do not go hungry at school. They don't debunk classes because they are hungry. They are fed. I'm not sure whether it's twice or 2 meals a day or so. So we can go on and on and on the positive side of the budget. Be that as it may, we find ourselves today having a fiscal cliff that we are facing. We as the SCOF, this committee, we are responsible for the fiscal framework. As colleagues have outlined the process. After tabling of the budget, the Speaker refers the budget to our committee, that's SCOF, to deal with the fiscal framework. After adopting the fiscal framework report, the next process is Mr. Maimane, that is appropriation committee. They deal with appropriation, the actual allocation of a budget until Parliament passes what we call the Division of Revenue Act. And then from there, it goes to the NCOP. Then there's a stage where we deal with the auditing and the assessment. That's where the Standing Committee on Public Accounts comes in, because as Parliament we have got an oversight role. So there is an ecosystem amongst the committees that are here. Then the same applies in the NCOP. With this fiscal cliff that we are facing, we also have geopolitical instability. The geopolitics have got serious challenges. You can see for yourself, every day somebody wakes up and issues an executive order because of the powers that are bestowed in him. And you can't ignore him because he's leading the biggest economy in the world. Whatever decision he takes, it has got an impact throughout the world, the geopolitics. So we have to deal with that. And the global economy has not yet fully recovered from the last time we had a financial crisis. We have got lots of problems since then. As South Africa and other countries were badly affected by COVID-19, which ended up in the retrenchment of more than 2 million workers, and we had to bring in what we call the SRD. The president announced that there's an SRD to cushion those who were badly affected by the COVID-19. We have the problem of climate change, which we have got no control over. KwaZulu-Natal is one of the most affected by climate change. And recently, provinces which are in the eastern part of the country have been seriously affected by floods. This morning when I was coming down from OR Tambo coming here, I was reading a newspaper of bridges that have been badly damaged in Johannesburg because of the floods. So with all these challenges that we are facing, what do we do? Because we have to provide a solution. And we are not here to preempt what the minister is going to table on Wednesday. He's going to table the budget, but we are the decision makers. Budget decision is taken by Parliament because it has to be an act of Parliament at the end of the day. So we know what the challenges are, as colleagues have spoken about the debt challenge and many, many other challenges. But some of the things that we have to look at is to curb illicit financial flow that we are facing. And what do? We have to build the SARS capacity. SARS has identified that there's almost 800 billion uncollected tax revenue due to unpaid debts, overdue returns, and fiscal leakages. We have to enhance the revenue collection requirements to bolster SARS financial and institutional capacity. Because SARS has made a case to Parliament that if we allocate them more resources, they will be able to collect more revenue. And they've presented empirical evidence in that regard. And what do we have to do specifically is to strengthen enforcement and compliance, modernize the tax infrastructure. There's a lot of money which is not taxed, more especially because of the advent of technology. We have been raising this issue. SARS has said that they've got limitations because there are certain decisions that must be taken at OECD. But as a sovereign state, we have to look at this issue of the digital economy, which is making a lot of money today, because that's the way to go. For me to come here, I had to order an Uber at the airport. Does Uber pay a license like any other taxi that operates here on our road? The last time I was a Minister of Transport, there was an issue about Uber. And government was initiating what we call an e-hailing legislation to regulate those who operate in that space of digitalization in the transport space. There are so many things that we can talk about in the digital space that are not taxed. And if we have to expand the workforce of SARS and modernize their infrastructure, they will be able to collect more money. We have to promote an inclusive economic growth, create jobs, reduce poverty, address high cost of living, build a capable, ethical, and developmental state. We can't have an economy that excludes the majority. 3 weeks, I think 4 weeks back, we had a meeting with the banking sector. The banking sector is one of the biggest sectors of the economy in South Africa. And financial sector as a whole controls 21 trillion worth of assets. And we raised an issue with them that why are you not investing in the economy with the money that you have? Because if they can be able to release the money that they have as insurance, pension fund administrators, banks, financial sector is quite very big, and partner with government, we can go a long way in creating jobs for the South African people. We had to deal with the issue of lowering the debt, which is quite very high, and colleagues have spoken to that. That is one of the fastest growing budget items. You should not allow a situation where debt grows bigger than education and health. Then you are going to be in trouble as a country. But as it stands, that is going to surpass social development, health, and education. And we have always raised an issue with Treasury that they must come with a debt management strategy, because we don't want a situation where debt will become unmanageable. And colleagues here have spoken to that. Improve public financial management, ensure that there is efficient and effective use of public funds, maximize the impact of government spending, promote industrial development, and towards conclusion, there's the issue of what we call the gender responsive budgeting. It's something that hasn't been fully attended to. We can't have a budget that does not respond to gender policies. So our budget should translate the gender policies into concrete, trackable, pragmatic budget. Why do we specify gender? It's because black women suffered triple oppression more than all of us. And for us to reverse that, we have to take deliberate policy actions and allocate resources to address the triple oppression that women of South Africa suffered. So this is quite very important for us. So these are some of the issues that we are going to raise very sharply with the Treasury and other departments that appear before us as finance committees. Thanks very much, Program Director.
No, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, honored stakeholders, guests, and members of the media. Thank you, honorable chairpersons of oversight committees of finance. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a time for engagement. That is a very important aspect of this event. It will give opportunity. As we said, this event is a hybrid. We've got your good selves in the physical space, and then we have got the stakeholders and members of the media on the virtual platform as well. So we'll take questions, comments from both platforms, starting with the physical venue. Any question? I see two hands. You will be the first, second, the third. Any other hand on the physical platform? You will be number 4. Any other hand? Okay. So we've got 4 hands we'll take that as the first round, or maybe we should just take as many as possible, given the sizable number that we have here of the panel. So they are very much well capacitated to deal with all these questions. So I will just ask the chairpersons just to note those questions so that they can deal with them once I've taken all the hands. So that will be the first round, and then I will check from the virtual platform in that order.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the presentations. My name is Catherine Sutherland, and I'm representing Equal Education Law Centre and the Budget Justice Coalition. I have 4 main questions. In the budget that wasn't passed, Treasury made it quite clear that the Bella Act and Grade R in particular was not going to be funded in 2025. The Department of Basic Education has essentially ticked all the boxes in terms of providing a costing. I wanted to know if the committees are concerned regarding this, considering that this act went through the proper parliamentary processes, and essentially if they're concerned whether this oversteps the separation of powers between the executive and parliament. And my second question is, so we're very happy to hear that the committees have a particular interest in enhancing the public participation process of the budget, because up until now we've seen committees play a rubber stamping role and essentially assume that the budget will be passed before it even meets, it lands on any of their desks. So the question here is, how is the public participation process going to work? And does the committee have any ideas on how to enhance public participation, not only just in the tabling of the money bills, but also throughout the year as the budget is being made, to avoid further delays in the future if a budget was going to be amended or rejected. My third question is that the committees have in the past seemed quite scared to enter into any debates regarding revenue raising, and have mostly focused on better spending, which is very much understandable, but I've also consistently asked people who have engaged in the public participation process where they think they should get the money from, which department they think the money should be coming from, essentially pitting one social service over another. So our question is essentially, are the committees going to actually engage with progressive ways of raising revenue? And then my last question is, noting that it hasn't happened before, if the committees decide to reject or amend the budget, could you please elaborate on what the procedure is going to be after that? Thank you.
Good morning, Lula Mamakia, SABC. The chairperson, Dr. Masongani, spoke about the country facing a fiscal cliff. The question is to the 3 chairpersons, Finance, Appropriations, and Scopa. Between raising VAT and borrowing to raise the additional revenue that the country needs, at the end of the day, the country needs money. Where must it come from? What would you say between raising VAT versus borrowing? That's the first question. Or else, if maybe you have another proposal as the chairperson of a particular committee that money must come from, where must it come from? And then secondly, the last budget was postponed because of a cabinet disagreement over VAT increase. Minister Kotongwana makes a proposal and tables it in Parliament. It's up to Parliament to approve it. Would you have preferred, any of the chairpersons can answer, would you have preferred that he tables and you as Parliament exercise your oversight role in rejecting that budget, or you want to approve it? How would you have preferred it? Was it the correct way for Cabinet, when they disagree, to postpone rather than allowing Parliament to take its process and arrived at the decision that Parliament decides it's best suitable for that. And lastly, in your capacity now as leaders of political parties, which is ANC, BOSA, as well as Rise Mzansi, what's your expectation of the budget on Wednesday? Thanks.
Okay, that was the second hand, and I would prefer that the members of the panel do not give party perspectives on the budget process, because they are here as chairpersons of the parliamentary committees. Yeah, I think you can still get that one outside of this platform. The third hand.
Good morning. My name is Nape Sinong and I'm from Youth Capital. So there's a lot of talk around economic growth, and our campaign, we are a campaign that advocates for policy change around youth unemployment, to solve youth unemployment. But we haven't had anything being mentioned around public employment programs. There was some chatter around the SRD, but we know that the young people fall in, they use grants as a safety net. Grants become a safety net when you are not in public employment, that, can sometimes yield, or sometimes result for a young person to find meaningful work in the future. And I just want, because the president centered quite a lot of his, youth unemployment, solving youth unemployment strategy around these programs after COVID. I just want to check from the members of parliament that are here, that what are we saying about the crisis of youth unemployment? I did not hear a lot being spoken about that. And for us, we think that it is one of the core contributors to poverty, inequality, and yeah.
I think the last one, Jason.
Thanks, Moloto. Good morning, Jason Felix, News 24. I just have one question for Mr. Masangwani. You mentioned bolstering tax collection, that the committee received a presentation from SARS on that. I just want to ask you one straight up question. Are you against any VAT increase or any VAT hikes? And if so, could you please give us some reasons as to why you are opposed to that or not? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any other hand that I might have missed or gotten provoked after the others have raised? Okay. I'm going to then go to, okay, there is. All right.
No, thank you so much to the chairpersons. Thank you so much. I think, my name is Dr. Mbava. I am the chairperson of the Financial and Fiscal Commission. I think this is an opportune time to, as Honorable Maimane has rightfully said, to just interrogate the budget process in terms of its integrity, how it has been implemented. As you would rightfully be aware, in terms of the Constitution and also the Intergovernmental Fiscal Relations Act, the Financial and Fiscal Commission is required to be consulted substantively on the budget before it is presented to Parliament. That's very important. And in that consultation, the Fiscal Commission looks at the division of revenue in terms of its equity and whether it meets the constitutional muster. So in instances where we are of the view that that consultation has not been substantive, it's a great concern. in the sense that is the budget process maintaining its integrity. What we are putting forward now is to say that we do not believe that we have been consulted quite effectively as the Commission. And what that means is that the budget process in itself, the entire budget process, whether it is the procedural irregularity on the budget process could be a question that needs to be interrogated to say, was the budget process implemented in line with the Constitution and in line with the intergovernmental fiscal relations? Because if the analysis and the scrutiny of the Financial and Fiscal Commission as an independent body is not properly considered, it has huge implication in the sense that the allocations at a later stage can be found to be inadequate or not to have not to be equitable. So in this instance, going forward, and as a discussion point, the role of Parliament in actually facilitating that consultation is going to be very important, and something that the FFC would like to engage with the committees on to facilitate that substantive consultation in line with the Constitution and in line with the statutory requirements of the budget process. In the absence of that, it actually puts the entire budget process at a risk of being illegitimate. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mbava. Colleagues, then I will go to the virtual platform before giving the chairperson's opportunity to respond. I've got the first several questions from Naia. I hope I'm pronouncing it properly. Naila, yes, Naila from News 24. These are general questions for the committee chairpersons. One, would Parliament support any form of VAT increase proposal from the National Treasury's budget on Wednesday? That's question number one. Two, what would happen if the budget was not passed or faced opposition from a majority of parties following its tabling on Wednesday? Third one, what would happen if the budget was not passed or faced opposition from a majority of parties following its tabling on Wednesday? Three, the budget has never faced any major amendments in the past. Will Parliament go through each line of the budget individually? And if an amendment is required, how will committees deal with any opposition or amendments? The fourth one, the last one from her is, okay, it's not the last, it's the fourth. For the Standing Committee on Finance, this is a specific one to Dr. Maswanganyi and I think Honorable Ndlovu. Yeah. Okay. The Standing Committee on Finance. What will happen if the tax revenue amendment bills, including the VAT proposals, are not passed? And then the last one, should the Treasury bring an emergency bill to deal with half of PEPFAR funding? Should the Treasury bring an emergency bill to deal with half of PEPFAR funding? Those are some of the questions from the virtual platform. Are there any other questions from the virtual platform before we give chairpersons to answer, to respond? None. Okay. Thank you very much, chairpersons. Those are the questions and comments from the floor. I'm going to start with Honorable Zibi. I think you've got your own mic there.
Yeah. I hope I'm audible. So there are questions that I think are more suited to my colleagues, depending on what they ask. So I am not going to respond to the bill. I think the Standing Committee on Finance and Appropriations are appropriate to do that. The public participation process, Honorable Maimane dealt with that issue, so I'll skip it. The committee is going to engage with progressive ways of raising revenue. I've got my own views, but I'm at the other end of assessing expenditure, so I'll skip this one. But we can talk about it outside. And what if the budget is rejected? Look, I am going to comment on this because I think it's relevant for all of us. Budget was never meant to be a fait accompli. It never was. The Constitution does not envisage the process in that way. We simply have had a majority after every election, which meant that MPs could be whipped to support the budget. That's it. We don't have that reality now. And I think it's important that we accept that this is what may happen year in, year out. Parliament, if we were to use the analogy of companies, Parliament is the board of South Africa, board of directors. Cabinet is the exco. The finance minister is the chief financial officer. They table a proposal before the board. The board is under no obligation and never has to accept that proposal as it is. This is not supposed to be a procession. There is no crisis in that respect. This is what the drafters of our constitution envisaged as a form of accountability in the system. There is no crisis. This is how it's supposed to be. Right. So I think this is also an opportunity for Parliament to do its job. People have previously sleepwalked their way through the budgeting process. That's a fact. They've sleepwalked through it and left the majority of the work to the relevant committees. For the rest, they don't care because the budget is going to pass anyway. It's different now. One of the proposals that I have, for instance, as an MP, is that there may be reason to amend the procedures that have previously been taken to present the budget. That is, present two appropriation bills. One is for the continuing expenditure that is not in dispute, so that you continue to pay salaries and all of these other things that you need to do, and that the incremental spending falls under a separate bill. And you force MPs and political parties to say what they choose to fund and what not to fund. But we can't have people speaking in generalities when it comes to the budget, and they never get to make any tough choices. Secondly, where must money come from between raising VAT versus borrowing? I think this question applies to all of us. Here's what I want to say. We must internalize this. When I mentioned earlier on that South Africa has borrowed 2.8 trillion thereabouts, that we cannot show in terms of growth and change to people's incomes, that's important. By the end of this financial year, we will be paying per annum 447 billion. 447 billion servicing debt. The only line item in the budget that is bigger is basic education, and it's only by a margin. We need to choose. Here's how we need to frame these choices. Do we choose to pay debt, or do we choose to fund education and health and all of these things that South Africans need to access their dignity? There's a lot of ideological talk about these issues, but that essentially is the choice. 447 billion is over 30 billion a month. It's about 33, 34 billion a month, which means it's about 1.2 billion a day for 365 days a year. We paying for money that we used. And I'll give you an example. We bought locomotives from China, 54 point something odd billion. Not a single one of them is running. Not one. Transnet pays over $1 billion a month servicing that debt. So, what must happen? We spend too little. You look at health, you look at all of these services. We spend most of our expenditure on salaries, not building hospitals, securing equipment, and this kind of thing. That equation needs to change. Let us not, and I will not do it as an MP, tell South African people that there is no money problem. There is, and it's big. If we are to say we must borrow more, you must say, let's borrow more and then spend more money servicing that debt. And you know what? That bank That money goes to bondholders, it goes to the PIC, it goes to banks, it goes to overseas investors, it leaves the country. That's a choice that we must then make. And therefore, the reason I spoke about waste here when I stood up is because we are wasting money. We really are wasting money. The government cannot pay 45% more for office space than a company. Come on. We can't do that. And yet we talk about where budget is going to come from, money is going to come from, and so on. We don't talk about how we stop wasting money. We do. And Parliament's job is to reckon with those issues and hold the executive accountable. The last point I want to say on this, I sit in that committee. Even members of the committee say, what is Treasury doing about it? What is AG doing about it? Nonsense. It's Cabinet's job. It's every minister's job to do that work. So let us use this fiscal cliff that Honorable Maswanganyi is talking about as an opportunity to see which committees really actually do their work and whether Parliament is doing its work properly. But we can't go and increase VAT and do all of these things so that money can be wasted. And then everybody looks at Treasury. Come on, we can't do that. Right? So, Honorable Maswanganyi was asked a direct question about VAT increase. I'll leave you up to that. The FFC, I will also leave to the committees that deal with the processing of the budget. And I've also dealt with the question 6 from Naila News 24. The budget never faced any major amendments in the past. Will Parliament go through line items? I believe Parliament must go through line items. They must, actually. If Parliament doesn't, it's failing in its job. Must go through line items, right? So I think it's important that we make sure that we understand the different accountabilities properly. The last question I'm going to deal with is, should Treasury bring an emergency bill to close the gap for PEPFAR funding? So I'm going to deal with this question broadly. This is the other reality we're going to accept. There are too many global factors that are outside of the control of the finance minister. What President Donald Trump wakes up and decides to do tomorrow is not under the control of the finance minister. I want to propose to you that one of the things that may possibly happen is that we get kicked out of AGOA, which means our trade deficit changes, our balance of payments changes, the movement of our currency is different, the exchange rate is different, what we pay for oil and petrol and all of these kind of things changes, the inflation picture changes. So if you consider the Reserve Bank a couple of months ago, about a month and a half ago, said just if you assumed that there were tariffs against Europe, Canada, and so on alone, it would have an impact on the value of the rand, on the exchange rate. It would have a 0.5% impact on inflation and so on. So let us not sit here and think that we also live in a world where everything is constant. It's not. I will say that in the budget that was going to be tabled and in this budget, I can tell you without fear of contradiction, there is zero room provided for those realities. Zero. And when those events come to pass, we will be back in Parliament because the appropriations are unsuitable. So what I'm trying to say is this. We must not have a mindset that is insular. And we assume that global events have no impact on us. They do. These are some of the considerations the Treasury takes into effect. Otherwise, if we do that, we're always going to fight with Treasury unnecessarily, because Treasury has a responsibility to advise Parliament and say, if you do X, Y will happen. We cannot be impervious to that advice because we want outcomes. I still argue that there is enough money in the system if we use it properly. But we don't. I made an example about water losses. 4 municipalities, 800 million, 5 billion over 3 years in additional revenue. If you fix the infrastructure. Do we have that conversation here in Parliament? Not in that way. So this is an opportunity to transform the way we look at the country's finances, the management of those finances, and the investment decisions we make around that money. It's not just about PEPFAR. The question is important. And somebody's going to look at the finance minister and say, solve it, but don't increase any taxes, but find 44 billion rand somewhere. Money doesn't fall from trees. The government extracts it one way or another from citizens. In fact, I do want to say on the SARS issue, I want to give a bit more color. So there's crypto now. So wealthy people are externalizing money using crypto. SARS needs billions of rand. In order to see, they need blockchain technology and so on, in order to see what happens in that universe, who's circumventing taxation and exchange controls and so on, and collect that tax. It's not easy. What I'm trying to say is when we talk this discussion about what the government can or cannot do, we must also think carefully about what we fund. If the decision of this parliament is that we are not going to fund SARS to collect more money, then fine, but that money's got to come from somewhere. Otherwise, we lose more money. You need to spend money to earn money. You need to spend money to save money. In other words, spend money fixing the infrastructure so that you can collect more revenue out of water and electricity and so on. So we must not have a conversation with the South African people that says you can have nice everything. Nobody has to feel any pain. And I'm not a supporter of income tax increases saying that. But you also can't have diplomats getting paid as much as they do, like I was explaining now. And then we cut expenditure in other areas. But it's a country where the trade is so small as to be meaningless. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Zibi. Honorable Lukwaso.
I think I'll dwell much on the issues of public participation, as the question was how is public participation going to work? And I think in the 6 weeks process, I partly touched on public participation, because we are mandated as a committee through Section 72 of the Constitution to ensure that public participation happens. And how we go about it is that as a committee, after the introduction of the bill, we do open up for public participation through advertisements, and advertisements will be in all official languages through radio stations, newspapers, and Parliament's website. And the committee will then open up for everybody, whether an NGO, whether an NPO, or any individual that would like to make a submission. And then we are also mandated by the Constitution anyway, and the Money Act bills and the procedure mandate, the mandating procedure acts of Parliament of the provinces, that even when we deal with the processing of the bill, the provincial legislatures conduct their own public participation because they are closer to the end users and those that the budget is going to service. I want to also touch on the issue of the Bella Act as it was raised. The Bella Act is a new legislation given the current budget constraints. We hope that this matter will be addressed in the next medium-term expenditure framework, because the country is used to the current MTEF to do its budget. Therefore, this needs some part to form part of some baseline. And also some of the issues on the line items, whether Parliament must, I think it was already covered and for relevant to our committee. I think also what was raised by Dr. Mbafa must be taken into consideration, and I think it will really assist if the chairpersons on the committees on finance responds to the comment made by Dr. Mbafa, and also it's a question that can also be directed to National Treasury for response. But I, as a chairperson of the Select Committee on Appropriations, take note of the submission that has just been made. I think for now that's where I will end, because I was partly covered by the previous speaker.
No, thank you very much, Honorable Lukwaso. Honorable Chairperson Ndlovu.
Thanks very much. I think from my side also, I'll only touch on the public participation, as I've already indicated that we have already issued the public the advert, whereby we on the 26th of the 26th of March, 24th of March, will be able to will be having a public hearing. So all the stakeholders, if you want any information, I'll have it. I can share with you outside the session. Then whereby we invite all the stakeholders to make sure that they bring along their contribution so that we can be able to share what is it that you expect from us. So I don't want to repeat what other colleagues have said, especially the issue of Dr. Mbava. I think from our side also it has been noted, and we hope that our sister committee from Standing Committee on Finance, they will be able to handle that and will be able to get advice, especially when we'll be meeting on the joint sittings. So they will be able to indicate to us how did they resolve the matter. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, public consultation indeed is a cornerstone of this budget process, and that's why I was happy about Honorable Maimani hijacking the platform to announce and to encourage participation by the public, NGOs, civil society, and so on and so forth, because that is very important. Budget adoption by Parliament will be incomplete constitutionally, legally, and otherwise without the participation of the society. So that's very important. Thank you very much, Honorable Ndlovu. Honorable Maimani.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I don't want to sound alarmist, and perhaps I want to give credence to the finance ministers that have served this country in the manner that they have, with the conditions they've had, and almost in some ways, when I think about Minister Kodongwana, recognize the fact that we are now heading to a point of significant crisis. That is a reality. We are no longer making choices that are good or bad. We are making choices that are worse or much worse. And that's where we are. We are at the peak of taxation. You can't tax citizens more, and I'm talking about personal income tax in this regard. Because after that point, you start to create tax morality issues, where citizens simply figure out ways to avoid tax. Wealthy people don't pay as much tax because, to Honorable Zibi's point, you figure out a way to externalize your wealth. So the 460,000 taxpayers who sit in the middle, those who do the majority of tax payments, are the ones that are going to feel the ultimate impact. So now we must think about what choice we're making to honor those citizens. That is and these are not straightforward choices. You are now at a point where I don't think it's sustainable for South Africa to think of the budget as an exercise in adjusting for inflation. It must now think of the budget as an exercise of going, what significant choices are we going to make? There's a lot of discussion about saving millions to achieve a reduction in billions. For example, it's easy for me to sit here and say, sure, reduce the cabinet, right? Except the reduction of the cabinet, even consistent with the previous special appropriation, is only in the hundreds of millions relative to the 57 billion rand shortfall that you would either get or not get by increasing VAT. So we really are at a point now where we have to make tough decisions. And so when the question is put from the floor, do I endorse a VAT hike or more borrowing? In my personal capacity, I certainly can't. Because there are also disproportionate impacts when you start to increase VAT. In fact, over the long period of time, impacts the poor. And as I've alluded earlier, once your bonds are rated in the manner that they are, increasing borrowing in that regard is not going to help. In fact, it is going to mean you spend more on debt than you do on other social services. The room, in my view, is to make choices on expenditure and efficiency. That, for me, is the harsh reality. And I'm hoping that in some ways, we must really confront, in its honest sense, whether the government believes we should continue the SRD grant or not. That's the question. Now, whilst you might say it's a tough decision to make, but one that has to be confronted. Because the Constitutional Court has already made a ruling on what should the expansion of the SRD. Now, if you and I are having this conversation this year about its difficulty to fund, then you have to explain to me how you are going to do that in the medium term once you start to have to comply with the Concord's ruling. These are harsh realities. There are realities about what is an affordable increase for public sector wage negotiations. There are harsh realities. There are harsh realities about some of the international work that we've raised here on this platform. But for even alone that, you've got to think about the policy decisions about whether you deploy more troops to the DRC, you fund other international. We raised it as a committee last year, even on matters, whether the ICJ case. And I can go on multiple international work that we're putting forward. You've got to say to yourself, whilst you might morally agree with that, we all agree we need to pay people. And we all agree that when people are unemployed, we need to shield them. We all agree on those things. So the question is not the moral question here. The question at this point, as we are confronting, is an affordability question. So can you do that and say, for argument's sake, you will fund international work at the expense of trying to balance off some of the work that you've got to do about HIV/AIDS compensation in a world where PEPFAR could be withdrawn? Which war do you want to fight in Africa? The HIV war or the DRC war? That's a choice. Can't. And so for me, I'm very cautious when I hear people ask me, let's just keep increasing, let's just keep borrowing, let's keep doing that. And I kind of go, at some point, someone has to pay the choice and has to take the tough decisions. They are politically unpalatable. So there's a discussion that must be had about where political parties put their hats and what decisions they're willing to live with. But I would argue you are not leading when you think you are going to keep everybody happy. That's a fact. So to the more specific questions, and I'll be quick, you are correct in your question about equal education in Bella. Bella envisages 200,000 children entering the ECD space. I can assure you, as night follows day, we are now entering a space where we are passing laws that are not fundable. That's a broad rule. So you can pass Bella, but you can't fund for Bella. And again, that's a policy choice. You can take 200,000 children and put them through ECD, or you are going to afford a particular increase in other sectors. Those are decisions we have to make. And some of those decisions have to be pitted against, and I'm not speaking politically, I'm just telling you what the numbers tell me, is whether, in this particular instance, do you think about it as an ECD conversation, or do you think about it as a higher education conversation? Because part of what has seen budget increases in the last 10 years has been the provision of free higher education. Now, as a government, you have to make those choices. You have to say to yourself, okay, I believe free higher education will give me higher dividend relative to access in ECD. But in this instance, I can tell you can't have both. That's a choice. Someone has to, wait, the executive, part of the reason people are then, you are elected as the president, is not to make the easy choices. It's these tough ones that you have to make. And I think, to me, this is the moment. I'm passionate about this because I think I don't want to deceive the people of South Africa into believing that everything is affordable if you just merely make adjustments here and there. there are some significant choices that need to be taken. And for me, I'll be looking, you asked me, I don't speak politically, but what do I look forward to at the budget tabling is whether there's a material exercise in choice making, because policy choices are fundamental. That's what political leadership in many ways is. In the delivery of material goods, you have to make choices. So the public participation, I think my colleagues have covered. Suffice to say, it is a hybrid process. So what you do is, the public adverts have gone out. You can write to our committee on appropriations. We will give you a slot on the day, which is the 2nd of April, and you can make a submission. You can do it in writing, or you can do it virtually, or you can not choose to exercise the presentation itself. If I'm not mistaken, Equal Education are regular customers. So I'm used to seeing them, so I'm hopefully going to see them now this time. The difference now that we're hitting is that actually all of these now have to be given proper consideration. And you ask the question, how does the budget then get amended, and what are some of those? The Appropriations Committee makes a recommendation to which the Minister of Finance is given 10 days to respond to. And when Parliament has voted on the appropriations bill itself, and it's been adopted, it is sent to the NCOP, at which point we can have nothing to do with it. But up until that point, there's consultation that we need to make recommendations that go to the minister, or to the, when there's a need for an amendment or an adjusted, to the affected minister. In other words, if I say the Minister of Transport needs to make an adjustment on program A, B, or C, then I must give them the fair opportunity to do so. But here's the big caveat. The caveat is that you don't adjust because you feel you must. You adjust only on the basis of the fiscal framework, which is tabled in finance, and that your objectives in adjusting deal with service delivery. I can't wake up in the morning and say, cut the defense budget, and not justify why, in fact, it must go into service delivery programs, or how is it in relation to the fiscal framework. So that's what we depart from. And that's why the executive tables that, has the provision to do so, and then we interact with that. I'm careful not to also conflate roles where eventually Parliament is the government. It's not. In this instance, there's the executive that is tasked with a particular duty. I would, and I think I've covered the point about the fiscal cliff, which Honorable Maswanganye has covered, and I think, for me, I think we must focus on the realities. You can't deal with agencies that sit across the government that don't contribute much value and say you are going to significantly look after them. You can't keep bailing out SOEs. The SOE debt is extraordinary. These are moments we have to make tough decisions. And I think, to the honorable member who asked the question about youth employment, I do certainly think that that is the fundamental question of what happens when you've got suppressed growth. So if I speak personally, part of the adjustment around the SRD, if I was to look at it, was to attribute it to some form of public works program that would create a direct link between not only productive financing and revitalization of infrastructure, but link that to what some form of youth employment program. Because then we're not taking it out in a zero-sum game. You're doing an equal exercise of saying, what are the more employment initiatives you can focus on? Because even when you speak to grant recipients, they do prefer work ahead of receiving a grant. And I would argue young people sit in the same category, in some sense. And of course, there are political issues about how we enhance youth employment, making sure that the quality of our pass is good, making sure that young people, can find work opportunities. That's a broader conversation. I think today we must confine ourselves to the issue of finance in and of itself. The FFC is absolutely correct. And I think you speak to the broader principle of ceremony versus what the law in fact says. The ceremonial bit has been, when we say we've consulted, it means we've sent you the documents. Now we are hitting a point where actual thorough interrogation, both on public participation, the inputs the FFC makes, I think there's a heavier burden on the PBO to be able to say, how do we help Parliament be able to make significant inputs? All of these institutions that support democracy now need to exercise the full provisions of the law. Someone asked me the question here, has the budget ever been amended? That was my first question when I arrived to chair the Committee on Appropriations. I said, has this exercise ever been done before? And people said, no, never, never. Because when the minister proposes, we've just taken it as the Bible and just said amen on the day and then off we move. Now we need to hit a point where actually we need to make policy choices and Parliament must assume its proper role, along with institutions that support democracy, the FFC, etc. So that actually those inputs, and this is not doing anyone a favor, by the way. These issues are prescribed in the Money Bills Act that give power to these institutions to make inputs. So it can't, it's the creation of the Money Bills Act was a function of going, and I don't want to get into ANC politics. Dr. Maswanganye, who's my co-supervisor in parallel, will correct to say this was the Money Bills Act was created post-conference so that you can ensure that the people had a voice in the budget, that it wasn't merely an exercise of the executive. Now we are hitting a point where that activity must be done in its fullest level of the law. So public consultation, I'm afraid, now is going to be forced because this conversation is going to have legal implications. I was saying to the colleagues earlier, even the term that says, you know, after you adopt the fiscal framework, 35 days after you have to adopt the Division of Revenue Act, that is 35 days on, and then it makes this caveat, or reasonably thereafter. In South Africa, we used to be foreign policy expert when we wake up to hear Trump. Now we are going to have to figure out what reasonably thereafter means. Because all of these things have to be now tested in law. So this is a crucial moment for us as a country, but I do think the laws that we have as a nation have given us actually envisaged this situation that we are facing. So at the absence of majoritarianism, which is when democracy can actually come fully alive. And I think this is a great opportunity to do so. So in that, I want to say, you also can't just leave it to special favors. I think we need to give better support to institutions that support democracy. I've spent quite a bit of time speaking about choices. I think you asked me the question about the US and where it sits. I close just maybe with this thought. Africa must think about how it preserves its sovereignty. And there's a conversation that must be had about how nations particularly think hard about as a continent. Let's use COVID as a good example. Patents around vaccines, Africa was one of the last to be able to adopt, which meant the cost of vaccines shot through the roof for when it got to us. We need to think hard about the future of where this conversation goes, because if you surrender your sovereignty by not being able to give your own patents on vaccines or being able to think about how you rate your own capital, etc., the headwinds that are blown between the East and the West, we are going to be caught in the middle of that. And I think Africa must think hard about how it funds its own health programs, how it deals with its own response on climate, how it digitizes, and how it cooperates on defense. I think these are some of the conversations that must be had within the continent, because otherwise the question of sovereignty or the question of how you execute on your sovereignty is going to be a debate that rages on, depending on which mood a leader of either the East or the West wakes up feeling on that particular day. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Honorable Maimane. Mchamashitulo, Tokotela Maswangane.
Check 1, 2. Is it audible? Yeah. Okay. Thanks, facilitator and colleagues. We can't postpone the freedom of our people. That every time we talk about the act of parliament that liberate blacks in general and Africans in particular, we want to talk about the money. There's nothing wrong about that debate. But the Bella Act is quite very important because it speaks to what 70 years ago our ancestors at Kliptown in Johannesburg have raised very sharply in the Freedom Charter, that the doors of learning and culture shall be open to all. We can't have an education system that is not open to all. Because I, as a member of parliament, I can afford whatever education system for my children. But what about those people in the townships and in the villages? And you know, Bella also addresses the issue of the language. Has that to do with money? If certain children cannot be admitted to a particular school under the pretext of a school governing body taking a decision on the language, that can't be allowed now in 2025. So it's not about all the monies that will be spent on Bella, but it is to open the doors of learning and culture to all. And you know the impact that it has, more especially to those who stay in towns and cities, where black children could not attend the school which is nearby with their white counterparts because of SGBs that will implement policies that continue to exclude black children. The issue of Expropriation Act, we have to address the land question. I don't have to go into detail about the land question. The struggle was about the land. And it is there in the Constitution. Where you get money, that is something else. But now that the president has assented to the Expropriation Act, it has to be implemented. The NHI has to be implemented. We are talking about the health for all, not a health for members of parliament who have got a permit and some of us who have got other medical aids. What about those people who don't have the same benefits that we have, some of us? So, and there's nowhere where the NHI Act talks about doing away with the private institutions that are there, whether private hospital, private surgeries and so on. It doesn't. It's when people want to blemish that act. It doesn't do that. It talks about having access to better health facilities, even for the have-nots. So these three acts and other acts are quite critical for South Africa, and they cannot continue to be postponed in terms of implementation. The issue of public participation has been spoken about, but what I should also say is that it's unfortunate that the budget tabling had to be postponed. I don't understand, because there is a process that Cabinet should have followed in terms of the ecosystem. You have provinces, other organs of state making inputs to budget and so on and so on. You have the MTech, which deals with the technical part of the budget. Then it recommends to what we call MINCOMBAD. It's a committee of ministers who are tasked to deal with the budget. It's a subcommittee of cabinet. I don't know what MINCOMBAD discuss. After that, you present the budget to cabinet, and cabinet has to officially adopt the budget. Not on the last day when you are supposed to table the budget. That should be done months or so in advance before you come to parliament. Because now they are going to put parliament under a very extreme pressure. Because in terms of the law, by July, we must have passed the the budget. That's what the law says, or else we'll get into trouble. And how are we going to do that with the little space that is left? It's going to compromise a lot of processes, and we don't want democracy to be compromised. We hope that next time Cabinet should do things properly and not dump a problem to the Parliament now, because that's what is going to create. On some of the issues raised by Lulama, of course, the issue of raising VAT vis-a-vis the borrowing, all this will have consequences, more especially on the poor, who are seriously affected by the cost of living. And the president, in many occasions, has spoken about government addressing the issue of the cost of living, because there are people who go to bed without food, and many challenges that people are facing because of the ever-rising prices of commodities in shops. So we have to deal with this. And as I've said in terms of borrowing, previously, Parliament has taken a decision that government, which is the executive through a national treasury, must come with a clear debt reduction strategy. How is it going to manage the debt which is ever escalating? And we hope they are going to do that this time. They have to deal with the economic growth that the president has spoken about of 3%, so that you are able to deal with the challenges. Because unless the economy grows, you will continue to have budget deficit. And the deficit is always growing. But we will have to find a way of dealing with the budget deficit. The Deficit Tax Commission once recommended the wealth tax. Maybe it's time that we have to look at it, because it's there in the recommendation of the Davis Tax Commission. This government appointed a commission led by Professor Davis, and it recommended, amongst other measures, a wealth tax. We might have to look at that. I don't have to go into detail here. Honorable Maimane has attended to the issue of the youth unemployment. The issue of SARS, whether we are going to have a VAT increase, we'll hear from the minister a day after tomorrow. What is he going to say? And we'll see how we deal with it as Parliament. The issue of FFC, we as Parliament have never undermined the role of FFC, unless it's Treasury. We fully understand the role of institutions supporting democracy, because institutions supporting democracy report to Parliament. They don't report to the executive. There is an office in the office of the Speaker that deals with ISDs. Of course, there are many challenges facing ISDs. There is a Kada Asmal report that we have to attend to. There is a Motlanthe report that we have to attend to. Last week, we met with the Speaker to deal with many other issues. And the Speaker promised that we have to attend to these two reports of Motlanthe and Kada Asmal. We, as the Standing Committee on Finance, after the minister tables the budget, the following day, on Thursday, the minister is going to appear before these four committees to discuss in details the budget. On Friday, the third day, FFC and PBO, Parliamentary Budget Office, come and brief the finance committees. If you look at the reports of of the Standing Committee Finance, we have integrated a lot of recommendations from the FFC and PBO. You can check in the Library of Parliament. they are there. So we take these institutions very serious and their recommendations. Last year, we took a decision as the Standing Committee Finance that the auditing of FFC should not be done together with that of National Treasury, because now FFC get money through National Treasury, and then at the end you find FFC is clubbed together with National Treasury, and we said that should stop. FFC should be audited independently because it's an independent constitutional structure. So there are decisions that we have taken to try by all means to strengthen the role of FFC, and that should be recorded so that we don't live here with an impression that we as Parliament also undermine FFC. And National Treasury, it has been raised with them on many occasions that they should take the input of the FFC into consideration when they deal with the issue of the budget, because they have got the constitutional responsibility. The issue of PEPFAR, I think Dr. Mtswale, it might be last week, has responded to this issue. I don't have to go into details about it because I don't have all the facts. But in case budget is not adopted, there's going to be a constitutional crisis. That's what it means. There's going to be a constitutional crisis that I don't think all parties want, because you might have a government as well shutting down because there's no money to allocate to departments and organs of state. Until such time that Parliament adopt officially a budget and then it becomes a DORA, it's then that National Treasury allocate money to all government departments and organs and other organs of state. But if not, what do? You can have an interim measure of relying on a previous allocation, but it can't go far with previous allocations. So we don't think that we are going to have a constitutional crisis. Political parties, which are there, 18 or so, will find a way of dealing with this issue. And lastly, the issue of our international relations. South Africa is part of the global village. We are not somewhere alone. We are part of Africa. Africa has adopted what we call Agenda 2063 through the AU. And that comes with obligations for all the 53 or 54 states that are in Africa. Amongst others, is to silence the guns. How do you silence a gun if you don't use a gun to silence another gun? Because you can't speak to M23 rebels and say, silence the guns. You respond to fire with fire. So, it can't be that we dissociate ourselves from the Agenda 2063 framework. We can't dissociate ourselves from the decisions of SADC. We ourselves as South Africa, we are a product of international solidarity. Countries have suffered as a result of them supporting us to fight against apartheid. Apartheid government went all out to bomb people in Matola in Mozambique, in Lesotho, and many other countries. There's been battles of Quito Carnaval and others where Angolans suffered for this democracy. So it can't be us today who are not pledging solidarity, international solidarity with other countries. So we have to look at this issue properly. We understand there are challenges, but the Defense Review, for instance, has got recommendations when it comes to issues of the Defense Department. But we are part of fighting for better world and better Africa. Thanks, Facilitator.
Thank you very much, Honorable Maswangani. I think, okay. Okay, I'm going to ask that the chairpersons are not going immediately. We can have one-on-one outside once we are done. I believe that we have overstayed our welcome here. Not you, but us, because we are the ones who were responsible for, because we pay according to the to the time allocated by the hotel. So we apologize that. But let me really sincerely thank you, beginning with the honorable chairpersons who graciously agreed, and they really were looked forward to engaging with all of you today. Honorable Zibi, thank you very much. Honorable Khwase, thank you very much. Honorable Ndlovu, Honorable Maimani, thank you. Thank you very much, Honorable Maswangani. We also thank you, the chairperson of the FCC, for your presence. Thank you to the Executive Director of the Budget Office of Parliament, both institutions playing a very important role in terms of advising these committees on the budget process. We thank you, Equal Education, for your presence, Rural Health Advocacy, Amandla Mobi, Public Service Accountability Monitor. Thank you very much. We thank you. And of course, all the colleagues that are joining online, thank you very much. So we apologize we couldn't identify your organizations, but we thank you. We thank you to the members of the media for your presence this morning and for your role in continuously educating the public about the budget process. It's very important, and we are grateful for that. Thank you very much, colleagues. The breakfast is officially adjourned.